Okay, so we've already had videos on centering and on throwing a basic cylinder. So now we're going to expand into different shapes. So shaping your forms. And the assignment you have in Ceramics 1 is that you need to have 6 shaped forms, 2 that have the widest point at the bottom, 2 that have the widest point at the middle, and 2 that have the widest point at the top. So I'm going to talk through shaping forms. I'm not going to linger on centering in this one because you have a video on that you can go back and reference. So I'm just going to do this quickly so we can get to the shaping part of it. So I'm coning up and coning down, getting it into a nice centered little hut. And then we're going to open it just like we did before in previous videos. We're going to find the center and push down. I do keep my thumb over the top of the piece so that doesn't become very thinned out. And always your hands are a unit. Always a unit. So I'm going to push down until I feel like I'm at a good place. Now, we'll talk about trimming in later videos. When you are making things to trim, you leave extra clay down at the bottom because you are going to trim away and have a foot ring. But for this one, I got about 1/4 inch, which is good if you're not going to trim it. And I'm going to start opening. Now, if I am shaping a piece and I know my bottom is going to be small, I don't open up the floor as much. If I know my bottom's going to be big, I do. So you do sort of want to know what you're trying for when you open. And obviously we have a lot of practice to do, so you're not always going to know because you just need to practice. But if you're going for a specific shape, you need to keep in mind what the end product is. If you want a piece that has a really wide bottom, but you keep the bottom very narrow, you're not going to get your wide bottom. So I've got my floor, I've compressed it. I'm going to go back and get this into a place where I can do pulls. So when we shape, sometimes we start with a cylindrical form because it lends itself to that. But if it's a extreme form one way or another, if you start with a cylinder, you might not be able to get it where you want it to be. We might need to try to keep it really tucked in, right? So we might need to, if you're going to have a really small top, we're going to try not to open up the top too much. If you need to, there's things called necking in, where you take both your hands and you apply pressure gently with both hands and it brings it in. If you try to do that too much too fast, you end up with a kind of a folded top, which you can try to compress back together, but it does make it a little bit harder to throw. So I'm going to keep moving this clay just like we talked about in the cylinder video. I've got a little bit of a wobble in there. I'm going to slow down my wheel and I'm going to recenter that piece, neck in this top. Now, I could do something simple and shape it just in a kind of, a V. and the bottom would be the widest point. Or I could work on pushing out from the inside and expanding that center, giving it a belly. And you'll see that I have my hands on the outside too when I'm doing that, and they're connected. I want to make sure I'm not pushing too much too fast, that I'm going to collapse the piece. Anytime you expand the clay though, it's going to thin it out. And so say you started with a cylinder and it was very thin, and then you decided you were going to push it out. You might very well collapse your piece because it'll thin out too much. So again, that sort of planning ahead and knowing that, hey, I'm going to push this piece out, so I need to leave it maybe a little bit thicker than my final product. Same thing goes for your final height. If you're trying to get a final height and you decide you're going to push it out, either open the top or push out the belly, it's going to make it shorter because the clay is going to start tall and then you're going to push it and it's going to flare open. So if you know you want to open something up and you want it to be a certain height, you have to take that into account as well. Clay is very plastic, which means it can go back and forth. Different types of clay are more plastic than others. This stoneware is pretty plastic. So I can open up this top and close it in again a bunch of times. I may end up with some little wobbles here and there, but I can usually deal with that. I can think about what I want to do to shape this. So again, pressure on the outside, I need to support it from the inside. I can take away some of that extra liquid clay and also use the shape of the rib to help shape the piece. So this is just a really simple form, but you can see that the widest part is kind of bottom to middle. I have extra clay at the very bottom that I can take away, either some of it now, some of it in the trimming stage. So another way you can make small bottoms is to leave extra clay at the bottom that you know you're going to trim away, because clay, when it's soft, doesn't have a lot of strength. And so if you try to make something with a really small bottom and a wide top, it's probably going to collapse. So we have to intentionally leave extra clay there that we trim away later. Now I can take away some of it now, but I'll have to take away more once it is what we call leather hard, which I will explain in a different video, which hopefully you've already watched. So I could have a piece like this. I could instead, well, before I say that, I'm going to trim the lip because it's uneven. So just like we did in the cylinder video, I'm going to push it in from the side, pick that up. I could decide this isn't the shape I want, and at a certain point you might end up collapsing your piece if you push it too far, but maybe I want to try to open up this top a little bit. So I'm going to apply pressure from the inside. We have different ribs that you could use if you're in the studio. You'll have certain ribs that come in your class pack that are yours to use and not to put back in the cabinet with our pandemic going on. But we have some other shapes of ribs that you could definitely try out. You just need to sanitize them before and after you use them. You can also use your hands. Your hands can do a lot. I like ribs for bowls. I think they help shape things really well. And depending on what curve you're trying to get, they can work really well for these other forms too. So I could make a shaped form that had the widest point at the top, and then I could try to bring in some of this other part by necking in just gently. And now suddenly the widest point of this piece is the top and not the bottom, or not the middle. So you'll want to do some pre-planning for some of these. Kind of figure out what you want to try for and go about that. We also want to always, whatever piece we're making, we want to try to finish up the lip, make that nice and smooth with no sharp edges. Make sure it's level. Make sure the bottom has a nice undercut in it. And then when you're happy with your piece, again, you're just going to take a rib and remove as much of the liquid outside clay as you can without hurting your piece in any significant way. So they've got all the liquid clay on there. And you can make a lot of different forms just with your hands or with the help of some ribs. And that's shaping. So shaping is using ribs, using your hands to push the clay in different ways. And again, just like I talked to you about in the cylinder video, you're going to collapse a lot of pieces if you're really trying to figure out what you can and can't do with the clay. Because if I don't push it further than it can go, I don't know where that point is, right? So if I'm going to open this more and more, and this is kind of becoming a bowl now. We'll talk a little bit about the differences with bowls. But how far can I push this before it falls over? It's going to get close. Throwing is all about controlled movements and trying to feel when that clay is getting to the point about being out of control. I've got extra clay down here. I can thin that out. How far will it go? The more I push it horizontally, the more likely it's going to fall over. It's going to go, I think. There it goes. It's starting to fall. That top lip is folding over, folding over. So I push this farther than it could go, and it flops over. So now I know that I need to stop before that point. So we're going to cut this off and do another piece.